The year is 1999. It's been 2 years since the mysterious disappearance of Edward Crow and the abrupt closure of his theme park, Crow Country. But Mara Forrest's arrival has broken the silence. If you want answers, you'll have to venture deep into the darkness of Crow Country to find them. Crow Country is a survival horror game where you solve puzzles and riddles as you investigate the eerie tranquility of the abandoned theme park. In spite of the whimsical theme park setting, something is awfully wrong in Crow Country. Think Resident Evil with a pinch of Final Fantasy. In this video, I would like to give my thoughts on this wickedly underrated game and discuss some of the plot and delve deeper into what's causing trouble in Crow Country. To start, I want to give my thoughts on the game. Crow Country manages to capture that dreamy, comforting feeling you got when you first played a Resident Evil game, with calming melodies playing during moments of respite, contrasted against the eerie silence of an abandoned theme park and the eventual panic when first faced with the guests. The combat is a little simplistic, and enemies give you little challenge. In fact, the only time I died was during the fucking Mushroom King puzzle, losing me an hour and a half as I was having so much fun I forgot to save. People who grew up with the PS1 or 5th generation consoles will know this pain all too well. Overdosing on shrooms with the Mushroom King isn't a bad way to go. I will forgive the combat shortcomings, as I would rather the combat be lackluster than cumbersome in this type of game. I've heard some Silent Hill comparisons, but I wouldn't go into Crow Country thinking you're going to get an experience similar to those games. The characters you encounter each have their own motivations in the park. They all have their quirks, and the game uses a lot of humour, which I find charming. It has a lot of childlike sensibilities, such as a main character being unable to resist putting on a ship captain's hat when operating a nautical theme park attraction. I'd rather not say much more about the game and would recommend that anyone interested in survival horror to play the game and then recommend it to a friend. In this section, I would like to highlight the game's story in a chronological timeline that will highlight key events. Afterwards, I will discuss some lore and characters. Spoilers ahead. In 1943, a young Edward Crow and his father went camping in Condor Country in southeast Atlanta, Georgia. They come across a wriggling green root coming out of the ground. Crow's father cuts into the roots and finds pure gold inside. The Crows buy the land and spend years harvesting the roots for the gold contained within. However, mining this gold turned out to have far-reaching consequences. They renamed the land Crow Country. What transpires over the next 40 years is not explicitly stated in the game, although we do know that Edward goes on to earn a degree in biochemistry from Emory University. He marries and has a child with a woman named Jacqueline until he is widowed when she dies in 1982. In early 1980s, excavations into Crow Country revealed an underground cave containing a water pool from which 7 long cylinders emerged, each with gold inside. If these roots were cut, they continued to grow, generating more gold. Edward Crow had a fortune in pure gold, but he could not find a way to sell more than just a little without raising questions. With Marv's help, they found a solution to their problem. Crow acquired an abandoned gold mine in Brazil as a cover operation. The plan was to ship the gold from Atlanta to Brazil, disguised as ores of geological interest, and make the world believe that the large amounts of gold they were taking out of Crow Country were actually coming from South America. Marvin goes out of his way to put together a crate full of gold ore to trick the inspectors into thinking the gold was mined in Brazil. Their plan worked, and they begin to make a lot of money, as the Atlanta Globe reports in 1987, by selling to at least 2 large international companies. In order to extract even more gold, Edward, Marv, and their miner, Tolman, hired a man named Pike to create an amusement park on the land. Its name was Crow Country, and it opened its doors in Q3 1987. The park became popular in Atlanta and an attraction for families in the region during the weekends. On March 21st, 1988, Tolman received a call from Crow telling him that an intruder alarm was sounding in the 2nd unit in Crow Country. When Tolman checked the security cameras, he discovered a figure standing by the pool. He is perplexed as to how they got in, as the doors were all locked. He describes that the person's clothes did not fit and they were unresponsive. They were in a bad way and malformed. This date marks the first guest's arrival. Douglas Pike reports that Crow seems ill, and he eavesdrops on Crow and Tolman, trying to converse with the guest. Edward Crow tries to communicate with the intruder, whom he refers to as the guest. Crow refuses to call an ambulance or the police, and the intruder is taken to one of the dig site's laboratories. Crow would not stop the excavation and mining of gold, but halts the construction of Cosmic Future and expansion to the park. Soon afterwards, Crow decides to take the guest to one of the warehouses on the surface, despite Pike's protests. Tolman also objects, as he believes it is dangerous to have this thing on the surface when there are customers visiting the park. Just 1 week later, on March 27, 1988, 2 more guests emerge from the pool, both in an even worse state than the first. Tolman describes them as broken, misshapen, and fallen apart. Edward tried to communicate with them, but he was unsuccessful. He finally decided to shoot them dead. According to him, they were in no condition to stay alive. Edward began conducting experiments on the first guest, and on the pool itself. Some of his experiments involved submerging a key attached to a chain into the pool. When he retrieved the key, it came back deformed. July 1988, Luke and Patricia Marshall take their 15-year-old daughter, Elaine, to the Crow Country theme park to celebrate her 15th birthday. An incident occurred where Elaine Marshall was separated from her parents in the Haunted Hill area of the park. She was discovered with a patch of blood on her t-shirt. She had injuries across her chest and stomach. When asked what happened, she said there was a man in the cage. She was rushed to the Atlanta Westview Hospital, where she was treated by Dr. Margaret Fielding. When in hospital, Elaine complained of headaches and dizziness. A medical report from the doctor suspects that the injury was caused by an animal. They say that the wounds were not healing due to a bacterial infection, and that the attempts to identify the bacteria were ongoing. G. Williams sends legal summons to Crow as the Marshall family decide to sue the park and Edward specifically, holding him responsible for the incident. Shortly after the Elaine Marshall incident, Crow Country Park closed in July 1988. However, gold extraction continues in the mines. Edward Crow did not seem concerned with the situation. Becoming obsessed with his research, he continues his experiments on the guests and the bacteria that they carry. By 1989, the guests continued to emerge from the pool, becoming more deformed and less human. Sometime in the same year, Edward locks himself away underneath the park in his laboratory near the pool. Meanwhile, Tolman and Pike try and fail to keep the guests contained within the park limits. A young man named Arthur Mole takes photos of escaped guests and sends them to a paranormal magazine named Beyond Magazine. They describe Arthur as an aspiring paranormal photographer. They say they are not convinced by the Polaroid and believe it to be a hoax. More reports of monster sightings persist. We find many letters talking about officials from both Brazil and the US becoming suspicious about where the gold was coming from. Around this time, Brazilian authorities began to have suspicions about Crow's gold mine in Para and investigate. They determined that the gold did not originate from that mine and seized all of Marvin Trumbull's properties, thus bringing an end to the operation. Marv escaped the authorities in Brazil and travelled back to Atlanta. Douglas Pike remains in Crow Country, overwhelmed with guilt for the role he has played in the park, and grief-stricken from the loss of his daughter, Ophelia, a few years earlier. Douglas takes his own life. 2 years after the park closure, a concerned Natalie Crow reported her father to the police as a missing person. In 1990, Mara Forrest, a special agent, investigated Crow Country. The park had been shut down 2 years prior, with its founder, Edward Crow, mysteriously disappearing. She finds an injured reporter named Arthur, who tries to warn Mara of dangerous creatures within the park. She helps him back to her car and continues her investigation, meeting Natalie, Tolman, Julie, Harrison, and Marvin, who all have their own reasons for being there. Shortly before this, a quarantined Elaine Marshall was tired of lying in a hospital bed, waiting for a cure or her eventual death, so she decided to escape from Atlanta Westview Hospital. She sabotaged the car of Detective Harrison, the police officer in charge of Edward's search. She stole the case documents and left for Crow Country under a false identity, Mara Forrest. We have reached the present day in the game, and the rest of the story is experienced as you progress through the game. Rather than repeating the story, I will move on to lore discussion in the next section. The note that Crow gives you at the end of the game alludes to the pool's purpose and why things started appearing through it. 2106. Uninhabitable. Ruin. We Come. 1988. Last Chance. Warn. Stop. Change. We learn from this that the pool is a portal to the future, and that guests are people who have travelled back in time. There is clearly something wrong with the portal, which is causing people to become twisted and malformed. We read a note about a key being dipped into the pool. It comes back misshapen and unusable. This could be due to the portal malfunctioning, or it could be that the planet is uninhabitable. Crow says that his gold extraction has been causing the mutations of the guests, and that they have gotten worse as he has cut down more of the roots. We can see the different stages of the guests in Crow's office. But this does not explain the infection. Everyone that comes into contact with the guests becomes infected. We see what the infection can do to people when we see Crow at the end. I guess we must assume that the bacterial infection exists on future Earth, and everyone has it. It's interesting that multiple times throughout the game, Elaine is aware of the guest's ability to infect, and asks if other NPCs have been hurt. She even goes as far as to lock Arthur in a car for his safety. At the start of the game, we are intentionally led to believe that these guests are standard zombies, whose bite can turn others into one of them, but we learn that Mara knows victims who are infected will slowly die. We find scribbles in the staff hallway. These etchings are drawn in blood. They have presumably been left by guests desperately trying to cling on to their humanity, and warn us of humanity and Earth's decline. The number 2106 is also scattered around the area. We find a note from Tolman, who sounds like he has been obsessing over the number, and has strong suspicions that the number is in fact a date. He spends his time analysing disasters which have affected humanity throughout history. Back in the hallway, we see drawings depicting Earth alongside what appears to be cooling towers, which are found in nuclear power plants. We can glean that whatever happens in the future, it is likely an environmental or nuclear disaster. We find another clue in the form of a hazard symbol, which reinforces this idea. About that drawing of the planet, it is hard to tell, but it may be bleeding, and is likely meant to symbolise our bleeding of Earth's resources. We find more blood graffiti depicting an oil well, which fits the message about our fossil fuel consumption. When we visit the haunted manor, we find a globe in the centre of the room. Elaine comments on how fragile it looks, which is possibly a comment on our planet. Upon revisiting the haunted manor, we see that the globe in the centre of the room is on fire. This could be a coincidence, or a way of guests trying to communicate with us about the future of our planet. Going back to the note, it says 1988, last chance. June 23rd, 1988 marked the date on which climate change became a national issue. In landmark testimony before the US Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, Dr. James Hansen, then director of NASA Institute for Space Studies, stated that global warming has reached a level that we can ascribe with a high degree of confidence a cause and effect relationship between the greenhouse effect and observed warming.
Altogether, this evidence represents a very strong case, in my opinion, that the greenhouse effect has been detected and it is changing our climate now.
There are little nods to climate change scattered throughout the game. The fairy tale town area has a theme that is all about how humans treat the forest and nature. The fairy even goes as far to say, "Welcome, child, will you protect our precious natural world?" Through the tree beyond the fairy, there is a room with a pond. A sign says, "Those who see the truth stare into the pure reflective water of our fairy pond." This pond has parallels to the pool discovered beneath the theme park. The pool holds the answers Crow desperately wants to find out. Much like the fairy holding the key in her pond, the guests are the key to curing Crow from his infection, and potentially saving our planet. I was wondering about the significance of room names for the roots. Each room, or root, is named after a day of the week. Root Mun, Root Sun. I think that this is an allusion to the nursery rhyme Monday's Child. Monday's child is fair of face, Tuesday's child is full of grace, Wednesday's child is full of woe, Thursday's child has far to go, Friday's child is loving and giving, Saturday's child works hard for a living, but the child that is born on a Sabbath day is bonny and blithe, good and gay. Monday's Child is a fortune-telling song. It is supposed to tell a child's character or future from their day of birth, and to help young children remember the 7 days of the week. Each room contains a message similar to the song. Root Monday has a plaque which reads, "Fair of face." Root Wednesday's room has a plaque which reads, "Full of woe," etc. It is not until we reach Sunday's room, which is directly beneath Crow's office, where we find a plaque which reads, "Preserved for posterity." It seems this root has not been harvested. The expression "preserved for posterity" implies that Crow is keeping the root for people who exist in the future. I believe that this is the final antenna that will allow for travel to the future or an alternative future. Of course, with the rest of the antennas damaged, you may not be able to come back in one piece. Crow is keeping this route intact so that the portal will remain open. We see the tip of the route in Crow's office. Nearby is a diary written by 10-year-old Crow. He talks of the day he discovered the route with his father. The first route is literally named after the day it was found, but the Monday's Child reference gives the name deeper significance. In the room containing Route Sunday, we see a model that depicts two people standing near the tip of the antennas. This could be a depiction of Crow and his father making the discovery. We can follow the route down to the pool where the guests are emerging. The last thing I would like to talk about is the potential for a sequel. Is there anything left to explore in Crow Country's story and setting? Did any of the creatures get out and infect people? We saw the hole in the fence, and we know that there were guest sightings outside of the theme park. Did they spread the infection to the outside world? There was an envelope left for Natalie Crow in Crow's underground lab. What did it say? We can assume it is a farewell letter or an apology, but this could have further implications in a sequel. Edward Crow obviously found more information than he is willing to share with us. When the first guest emerged from the pool, Crow puts him in a cell and has conversations with him, as he is the only guest who is still able to speak. Crow could have potentially put more of what he'd learned inside of the letter for Natalie, or even the formula to the cure he has created. To close the video, I want to raise some questions I don't have answer for. I would love to hear what you guys think. I will also go over a few tidbits and things which are easily missed. Did you know that there are alternative ways to get past hurdles in the game? During the compass puzzle in the Crypt, it is possible to circumvent the puzzle altogether by simply shooting the ticking clock on the coffin. You can actually obtain the gold key as soon as you enter the theatre if you have a flamethrower, as you can just shoot the head off the fairy animatronic and then melt the resin with the flamethrower. No acid required. This is how I solved the puzzle the first time around, not realising I needed to use the acid. When in Tolman's office, Elaine tries to turn on the radio, but the antenna has been cut off. She describes the sound that comes through as horribly distorted. The state of the radio bears resemblance to what is happening with the roots, with humans being transported and scrambled into something vaguely human, similar to hearing a murmur of a voice over a transistor radio. There is a note which mentions Ophelia, which I assume is written by Douglas Pike, her father. The very last time I went to the theatre with Ophelia, we saw an action movie about a cybernetic man from the future. I didn't really get it, but she loved it. She wouldn't stop talking about it. I got to work designing this cyborg Crow, since I thought she'd like it. I was going to propose it to Edward as a new themed area of the park. After I lost Ophelia, I shelved the project. The film they are talking about is Terminator, which was released in 1984. So that gives us another date to add to the timeline, as we know Ophelia was still alive then. The park opened in 1986 and closed in 1988, so we know Ophelia never lived to see the opening. Her death caused her father to stop working on the prototype cyborg Crow, which he says is a proposal for a new themed area of the park, which we know ends up being Cosmic Future. Cosmic Future has its funding pulled sometime after March 1988, when the guests arrive. So we know she died sometime between 1984 and 1988. The film Terminator has parallels to the plot of the game, especially time travel and apocalyptic themes. It features the Terminator, a robot assassin sent back in time from 2029 to 1984 to kill Sarah Connor, whose unborn son will one day save mankind from extinction by Skynet. If this is the last time Douglas took her to the theatre, we can assume she died in 1984. In the crypt, it looks like there is a tribute or shrine to Ophelia in the form of a tomb. When we inspect the grave, the plaque says, "Here lies Ophelia, tragically drowned, daughter, sister, human." From this, we can assume that the real Ophelia may have drowned. Is it possible that Ophelia is the one who discovered the pool? Perhaps she was exploring the mines and came across the pool and fell through the portal. This is before the time of the first guest making an appearance. It would explain why there is an effigy in the form of a wax model in the coffin, because there was no body to bury. This is just a theory, however. We find a golden statue of Jacqueline Crowe, which says she lived between 1948 and 1982. We find Natalie near the statue of her mother. She mentioned she died suddenly, but what actually happened to her? Was there foul play, or were the Crowes just unlucky and faced a lot of tragedy? Staring into the flames, I feel something. It's a curious mixture of hope and dread. Maybe everything will be okay, and maybe it won't.